Welcome back, everybody. Pokemon Pocket is just over a year old at this point, and I've been here since the very beginning. I've been grinding content, grinding ranked. I've been top 1,000 multiple times. I've held top 100 a few times, and today I want to talk about the cards that absolutely ruined the game and made that experience terrible. There have been some real head scratchers on why these cards were printed, and I think it'd be fun to go take a look back at the last year of Pokemon Pocket and identify what those cards were and why they made the game so terrible when you had to play against them. Now, for this video, I don't want to talk about the cards that were necessarily really strong, but the cards that affected the metagame in a way that just was not fun to play against. Whether that be unfair strategies that had no counterplay, it made board states that were kind of impossible to deal with, just cards that really made the game not fun when you had to play against them. The first card we have to talk about is, of course, Misty from Genetic Apex. When the game came out, there were so many fun ways to build decks. Really, the only one that you ever did not want to see was your opponent flipping over a Water-type EX because you knew that Misty was coming and the game could end before you could even play the game. Misty had the potential to do nothing. It had the potential to end the game on the spot. The real problem with Misty was that there is no rule saying you can't attack on your first turn, only that you can't attach an energy on your first turn. So it is totally possible to go first, starting an Articuno EX, use Misty, get 3 heads, and deal 80 damage before your opponent even had the chance to do anything. It was kind of fun to play, but to play against when you were the one getting hit for 3 heads on a Misty turn 1, it was the single worst feeling the game could produce. I could not stand it. I honestly, there were calls for this card to be banned for the longest time because of 2 reasons. Number 1, super unfun if you are the one playing against it. Number 2, it really limited, and this is why I think this card was such a bad idea and made the game worse for a longer period of time than just like when it was super relevant, is every single water type card had to be created with Misty in mind. They had to print, every water type ended up falling into the same category of, we need to make these Pokemon have a pretty big energy cost because there's a supporter that might get 2 energy in play when that shouldn't be the case. Otherwise, no other type has access to any form of, or this form of energy acceleration that is this easy to attain. And so you saw a lot of, every water type EX was kind of the same. Big EXs with big attack costs, doing a lot of damage. And that was kind of it for water types. It really put them in a spot. And for the most part, those water types would end up coming back to that strategy. We saw multiple times throughout the game where the best way to play water types was 2 EXs and 18 trainers. Not very interactive gameplay for the most part. You're kind of just hoping that the Misty heads do not go your opponent's way. If they don't, you can win. If they do, you lose. It legitimately made the game a coin flip simulator when you played against these decks. So I think Misty, for sure, was a big detriment to the game for a pretty long time. This one is a bit weird to talk about because I love the guy. I loved him for a bit, but there was a time when he was like the most toxic thing in the game. Was just a terrible time to play against this deck, and that is Executor EX. So there was a point when Spacetime Smackdown came out. You know, we got Darkrai, we got Magnezone, we got Rampardos, we had all these new cards, and they really took over the meta. There came a point in that meta when people realized, hey, if I just play a solo Executor EX deck, with 1 Celebi EX, of course, but if I just play a solo Executor EX deck, I'm going to hit Darkrai for weakness, which is pretty good, and nothing can really get through this Executor all that easy. So what you saw was a deck that was just Executor EX and a Celebi, a bunch of healing cards, maxed out on Sabrinas, every annoying card you can think of was in this deck, trying to just make your opponent have the worst time possible. It was, I mean, there was no thought process behind this. Not to mention the mirror match where you are just two executors staring at each other, flipping coins, hoping that you hit more heads than your opponent so you can get through their executor before they get through yours. This deck was a nightmare. Completely just nothing interactive about it. You could lose the game immediately if your opponent went first, evolved into Executor EX, and hit a heads, and they were able to get rid of whatever Pokemon you were trying to set up if it was stuck in the active spot. This was not a fun time to be playing these last couple weeks of Spacetime Smackdown when people figured out that this deck was amazing, and you couldn't even really counter it, because if you tried to counter it with, say, a Charizard EX deck, Charizard EX would just lose to like everything else in the format. So there was no fire types to keep the Executor in check. It was just the way around the Executor EX was hope that they don't flip enough heads. And it's like, really? That's what I'm playing for, is hope they don't flip enough heads and I can win this game? Terrible, terrible deck to play against. Executor, longtime favorite of mine for the game. But this moment when it was just Executor EX, just flipping coins in the active spot, no fun. I never want to see something like this again. Now let's talk about what I think is truly the worst format in the game. And that is when Arceus EX was released in Triumphant Light. But Arceus EX turned the format into really like two decks that you could actually play and have any sort of chance in the metagame. Arceus EX and Rampardos. Now, the problem with Rampardos is that the only way to beat Arceus EX was to high roll with Rampardos. Super difficult. You have to get a Skull Fossil down. You have to find both of your evolution pieces. This is pre-rare candy. So if you just couldn't find that Cranidos until by the time you find your Cranidos, sometimes the game could already be over because you need the 2 turns to evolve your Skull Fossil. It's one thing to get the Skull Fossil down on the ground, but then you have to evolve twice to get into it. And this deck was so aggressive, so consistent, because it only needed to play double Arceus, double Dialga. Dialga would set up Arceus very quickly, and then like a Shaman for a 5th Pokemon, just so you could always have your bench completely filled to maximize Arceus's damage, as well as just healing it a little bit between turns. This deck was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. I think it was the most centralized the metagame has really ever been. It was just ridiculous. And Arceus, you could argue, I mean, I did very well in a tournament. I got top 16 in a tournament in this format. And I can tell you, I was playing Gallade, which was a very, very fun deck. I loved that deck. I was only beating Arceus Dialga players that were not properly built to deal with Gallade. All Arceus needed was to switch out another card, which wasn't only favorable for them into Gallade, was just a better card to have in their deck overall. And Gallade, I would suddenly not have a good matchup against them. So this deck could just adapt to literally everything. And it was, in my opinion, one of the least fun ways to play the game, where you are just immediately, like instantly, your board is set up, it is done for you, and now all you're doing is playing trainer cards out of your hand that are glowing. Whatever trainer card is glowing, just play that out of the hand for turn, and you could probably win. You don't even need to play them in the right order, man. It doesn't matter. The deck was it just could adapt to everything. It had access to whatever it wanted because it played so few Pokemon, and the counterplay wasn't really that fun. The only way to counter it was Rampardos, and then you're just trying to high roll, and that's not fun when you're playing against one of the most consistent decks the game has ever seen. Especially at the time. At the time, the most consistent deck the game had ever seen, because all you need are your basic EXs, and you are off to the races. You can sweep your opponent before they have a chance to get set up. Yeah, this deck was absolutely miserable. Arceus EX after had a great redemption arc, though. I think past this format, Arceus decks became very, very fun to play. So, good on Arceus. It was only this 1 month time where I really think it was super toxic. But after that, Arceus was a great inclusion in a lot of decks. There were a ton of ways to play Arceus. A really fantastic card once we got stronger cards that could actually compete with it. Now I want to talk about Giratina, and this is for a lot of the same reasons I just outlined with Arceus, but a little bit more honed in. So my biggest problem with Giratina was that Giratina Darkrai did what Arceus wanted to do as well. It was just big EXs that were very hard to get through, not a lot of counterplay, and because this deck was not reliant on bench space in order to do more damage, you only had to play 4 Pokemon. Because of this, and as well as having built-in damage modifier with Darkrai being able to do 20 more damage every turn than you should because of Darkrai's ability, it meant that you were able to add in something that Arceus Dialga didn't really play, a lot of hand disruption. So you would then take this ultra consistent deck that could really only lose to if your opponent was able to set up a Charizard EX or some big attacker. And you could completely nullify that. You could take these already decent high roll decks into insane high roll decks. Like, they have to draw so well in order to win the game because you are doing the same thing every single game and preventing your opponent from playing the game. That was really my biggest problem with Giratina Darkrai, is that it had the space to run a Mars and a red card in it. Double hand disruption that almost guaranteed that you would lose your hand on either the first or second turn of the game. Sometimes before you even got to play, you would be hit with a red card or a Mars. You would have 4 cards in your hand, your opponent gets to go first, and then there you go. You had a research in your hand, you don't anymore. You basically lose the game already. That was my problem with Giratina Darkrai, is that it really took away a lot of the fun ways to play the game. I don't really love playing these big basic EX decks. I like to evolve my Pokemon. That is what we are here to do. It's what you do in the game. It's what you would like to do in the TCG. And when you're just fighting legendaries that, you know, completely take that strategy away from you to no fault of your own, it's not the most fun thing in the world. I mean, if you look back on the real TCG, a lot of people do not enjoy those formats where big basic Pokemon ruled over them. People like to evolve their Pokemon. I don't think it's that crazy of a take, being able to set up support Pokemon and these big EXs or these big stage 2s that are going to create, you know, like a real back and forth game. The big basics, it's just the same thing happens every single time, right? Your opponent puts the Darkrai down, they put the Giratina down, they start attaching energies, and if you don't get to even play the game, you don't have a chance to combat that strategy. Now, I know I had something to say for almost every set, if not every set that came out, but we are at a point where I think we can skip over some of these sets. Celestial Guardians, Extra Dimensional Crisis, Eevee Grove. I think for the most part, while those sets did introduce some very, very powerful cards, there was nothing in them that I necessarily hated playing against. I think the game was really in a golden era during this time. I think the addition of Rare Candy really fixed things, made evolution decks a lot more possible. Extra Dimensional Crisis, they actually released a basic base deck with Buzzwole and Guzzlord that were fun to play, that really gave you options and tools to make the game enjoyable. I really enjoyed playing in those formats, but we do have one more to talk about, and that is going to be Suicune from Secluded Springs. So, it was bad enough, and I'm telling you, this is not just fatigue over having to play against Suicune for an extra month because we did not get any new cards going from, what was it, September to October, I believe, or October to the end of beginning of October to end of October, whenever it was. We didn't get any new cards to play with, and that already, you know, okay, we got to play the same format twice in a row, sure. Maybe not the most enjoyable thing, but Suicune EX was a problem on its own, whether or not I had to play it for a month or a week, whatever. The problem with Suicune EX is that this card is more consistent than anything else in the game. It is more consistent than anything else in the game, and it has a better attack than... It is one of the best attacks in the game, just straight up. It can do 120 damage for 2 energy, has access to Irida to heal it, keep it healthy, has access to Greninja to boost its damage. All of these things made the deck ridiculously powerful. And my problem with it was there were not a lot of ways to counter this deck because the attack was so strong, because the ability was so strong. Just more consistent than everything else. My real issue is that the only real way to counter it was to play a worse version of the game. Suicune's biggest counter deck, I would say, during that time, its most successful counter deck, was Guzzlord EX. Not Guzzlord EX plus fun things like Naganadel and Nihilegos to boost poison damage and use all these attackers. No. 2 Guzzlord and 1 Celesteela. You would counter Suicune EX by playing the game as little as you could. Putting as little Pokemon down, trying to go for coin flips to remove their energy, healing the Guzzlord, whatever. And you could still lose doing that. Your opponent could set up a board state that would still win the game against it. The Suicune mirrors, I will say, were pretty fun. I enjoyed those. What the problem is that nothing was on the same power level, and the cards that were had to just play a really unfun version of the game in order to beat Suicune. I've been saying throughout the video, I don't want to play like as little Pokemon as possible. I want to have a nice cast. Like, optimally, Suicune Greninja would be a deck in a format where there are multiple decks just as strong with just as many options to it, so that you can have this really cool meta of multiple lines you can take during a game. Not just stick Guzzlord in the active spot, flip some coins, and then once you get 4 energy, start swinging for 120 damage. That is not enjoyable, and that was really one of the only ways to counter Suicune, was playing as little Pokemon as possible. Everything else that tried, I will tell you, the only deck that could really do it consistently was like Giratina Darkrai. Giratina Darkrai had a pretty good time against Suicune. Everything else in the format would either lose to Suicune or lose to Darktina. It was a very unfun time that was polarized completely by Suicune. And the format just before it was actually pretty diverse and pretty fun. And then Suicune came out and kind of ruined the entire thing. But that is going to be it for the video. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that you are enjoying this other style of content. It's really fun to look back on the year we had with Pokemon Pocket. And maybe after this, I will do a happier video and talk about the cards that kind of saved Pokemon Pocket when it was in a bad spot, or just the strongest cards, whatever. Let me know what you'd like to see in the comments. All right, thank you so much. I'll see you on the next one.